Greetings and welcome. Sekou Smith here from NBATV and NBA.com, member of the Southwestern Athletic Conference's Commissioners Advisory Board. We're giving you a chance in this forum, the Zoom call, to get a little more familiar with other members of the board, kind of what's going on, the initiatives, and also the personal histories and the backgrounds of the board members themselves. And first up on our list is Kris Wright, Clark Atlanta University alum, the Vice President of Global Footwear and Fuel at Nike. I mean, we're talking a serious, position in the business that I think everybody, all you students out there, certainly can learn a lot from. Now, Kris has been in the business 23 years in the footwear industry, over the course of his career. Brings a ton of experience working with multiple brands. And without further ado, Kris Wright, thank you for joining us. And if you could, Kris, give folks a little bit of a background on what your position entails at Nike and what a vice president, of global footwear does at a company like Nike.
Yeah, absolutely. What's up, Sekou? Appreciate you. Yeah, for sure. Appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me and delve into my background. So a couple of quick updates. This will be my 24th year in the footwear industry, and I'm actually in a relatively new role as a vice president of footwear for NSW men's category. So took a new role last September 2019. So kind of really getting my feet underneath me right now. I'd say that in this business and specifically this category, the number one thing, like my number one responsibility is about leadership, and is making sure that I'm setting my team up to be successful, and more importantly, making sure that I'm doing that by downfield blocking for them, making sure I'm making sure that they have the resources so that they can do their jobs at their best ability. And then also just pushing excellence to the forefront, and that can be excellence through product, which we have our hands closely tied to. That can be through process, and then that can be through team, and just making sure that everyone has everything they need to continue growing. You call out, I think, another really important aspect of my background. Unlike many of my colleagues, I've worked at multiple different brands. I didn't grow up at Nike. I think that's probably benefited me the most as I transitioned into this organization, having a lot of experience under my belt. I've worked at other brands in the industry. I've also been an entrepreneur, which I'd say was probably my most valuable experience to date. I like to equate being an entrepreneur, especially in this business, to going to grad school. Only difference was this grad school of experience cost me my life savings. But I say it was well worth it. Literally wearing every hat that you can imagine, from CEO to the guy who was picking and packing boxes to send to wholesale retail partners. Like the experience was invaluable. And then I've been at Nike now for 9 years, and also have a very unique experience within Nike Inc. Having worked at Jordan brand, having worked at Converse, which is also a Nike owned brand, and then working in NSW and Fuel for the last 4 years. Right. Incredible experience to this point. Super passionate about it. I'd say that while my passion has never wavered, you wouldn't have been able to tell me as a kid that I'd be doing what I'm doing today. So I always pinch myself when I wake up, because it's unbelievable that I've been able to be in this business, b ascend in this organization, and c just be a beacon of hope for kids who look like me, who are coming from the places the communities like the community I came from, and going to schools like the schools I've gone to as well.
Right. Let me ask you a question. You bring up some interesting points about, not knowing that this would be possible when you're a young cat. Now, when you grow up in Harlem, how do you first make that transition from Harlem to going to school as far away as you did, in terms of just the confidence to get out of what you know and to go try something different or to challenge yourself in a different environment?
Yeah, it's a really good question, man. I appreciate you asking that. I was a dreamer as a kid, and while I was embedded in a fabric of my community, I'd say the first ray of light that I ever got was when it was time to go to high school. And I kind of call out these passions. There were two things I was really passionate about. I was passionate about hip hop music, and I was really passionate about basketball. And basketball was my escape. I played at every level through my freshman year of college, but the main event in my adolescent and teenage years was going to school down in the East Village on Second Street, Second Avenue. I went to a school called LaSalle Academy. I had the
Oh yeah.
had an opportunity to play with some incredible teammates and played against some incredible talent in New York. I like to say those were New York's the New York golden era in basketball. But the escape of taking the train from Harlem all the way down to the East Village every day provided a ray of light and hope for me, because I was thrusted from Harlem in the late 80s, early 90s, which was completely black, to now this melting pot of what New York and what we perceive New York to be to this day, in this day and age. A lot of people don't realize that New York was a very segregated place, and still is to an extent today. But ending up in this melting pot and being around all kids from different religions, cultures, creeds, it really it provided a yearning for more for me, and that's what allowed me to see beyond New York, to see beyond Harlem, to see beyond my block. Because there's a lot of cats who couldn't, I call them block huggers, couldn't see beyond the block.
Right.
And then, quite honestly, my first stop wasn't Atlanta. My first stop was California, and that's how much I wanted to see something new. And it took me all the way across country, and I played a year of junior college basketball at a school called Maricosta in Oceanside. So that was the lead-in, and after 1 year there, I ended up in Atlanta, and got me back to the East Coast, but also just got me to another city to see different things, and to live a different level of life as well. So, yeah.
So I know you played at, as you mentioned, at all those levels, man. And I always talk about relationships being so important. Guys you meet early in life, and how that cycle, if you stay in the business and if you stay in this culture, comes back on you. I tell people all the time about a story when I met Jamal Crawford when he was a junior in high school. I was a young reporter. He was a teenager just coming up.
Yeah.
I saw him later in a locker room when I'm covering the league, and he's one of the players. And like we laughed about the game I was at when I saw him when he was an 11th grader. Now, you played in New York City, and you mentioned LaSalle Academy. I know that's Sham God country. I know there's been some other, big name basketball players that have come through that program and in that league that y'all played in. How much of the relationships you developed then have come back and been beneficial to you now in the corporate side of the shoe business and the culture, that have been things you had to make sure you leaned on and make sure you dove into in terms of fostering relationships with other people?
Yeah, that's another really good question, which will allow me to, kind of talk about one of the stops in my journey. Before I chat about a role I had during my time at Reebok, I think it's important to hit on one of the elements of your question. One relationship that is still a strong relationship to this day is I actually played high school basketball with Sham. I was 2 years older than him, but we were teammates in high school, and that dude was like my brother. And when I think about his journey through the filter of basketball, which is his passion as well, and where it's taken him around the world, and where he's at today, and what he's doing today, like I'm proud I'm proud of him. I'm proud to call him my brother. So I just want to just mention that. The other part of your question, I think, is important to really delve into. You know, I had a realization around my junior year at Clark Atlanta that you know, I still have a passion for basketball while I'm not playing it. And I wanted to figure out how I could harness that passion. And that's what took me to Reebok. I had a number of different jobs over my 8-year journey at that brand. And I'd say that when I transitioned into being a sports marketing manager, managing all of the NBA player relationships and league office relationships and agent relationships, I thought I had basically reached heaven. And that was like my dream job.
Right.
And you know, to your to be more specific to your question, you know, when I think about the relationships that I was able to foster as a kid, you know, playing for Riverside and playing at high school throughout New York, you know, it led to a lot of the relationships I was able to leverage, you know, as a sports marketing manager. Because now, you know, a lot of guys I played against, these guys are in the league now. So it just made it that much more of a seamless transition for me because I belonged. I wasn't on the court, but I belonged. And I was able to help folks out who I had genuine relationships with just through the sheer power of being a representative of a brand in this business.
Did you have somebody or something that showed you the light in terms of how you could marry that passion with a career? You know, in terms of, it's one thing to be passionate about ball and to really be into the culture and to be into the shoe game. I know there's so many students now that are sneakerheads or that might love playing ball, but they don't know how to make that transition from that, from it being a side passion to being a real hustle, and then for it to be an actual career where you can make some strides in corporate America, which you've obviously done to the highest level. How did you identify that path, or was there somebody that lit that path for you when you were at Clark Atlanta, or was that just you and your grind and your ingenuity figuring out a way for yourself?
It was definitely grind and ingenuity. I really wish that I had a mentor back then because I sure needed it. But to be quite honest with you, it all happened by happenstance. And, you know, I kind of go back to the things I said I was passionate about, music and basketball. I literally, during my first semester of my junior year, I cold called Reebok satellite office in Atlanta, and I cold called BMG's distribution office in Atlanta. I got interviews for internships to do internship for school credit at both, and I was offered the opportunity at both. Obviously, I picked Reebok, but you know, just to have the gumption to pick up the phone and do that in that day and age, you know, that kind of stuff just simply doesn't happen today. It's very I'd say orchestrated in terms of internship programs, but yeah, I think it's also just really important to say, and I'm sure, you know, most folks who come from the communities we come from, I'd say it's unfortunate, but you know, when we look at the beacons of hope, it typically falls into 3 categories, and I was no different. It was being an entertainer or being in the entertainment industry, being an athlete, or worse, being a hustler. And you know, fortunately enough, I wanted more, and I knew enough about, you know, what the latter would get me to know that I needed to focus on charting new waters. And you know, I say all that just to say that I take paying it forward very serious for the simple fact that I didn't have someone to lean on to help show me the way and provide me that ray of light and beacon of hope that opportunities would exist for me in the space that I'm in now.
Yeah. One word I always use when I'm talking to young people about trying to get into business, and I think a lot of us have had similar stories in terms of fearlessness, you know, where you you don't take no for an answer, you know, and when somebody gives you any opening, you run through it. When you make that leap and you believe in yourself, obviously the way that you did, what are some of the things you wish you could tell young Kris Wright about what he should be doing while he's walking the campus and while he's on the yard, preparing himself for what comes next? I mean, you don't have that hindsight at the time, obviously, but now knowing what you know and being in the business, you know, for a quarter century here, and I don't want to make you feel old, but I mean, it's what it is. I always think about how long I've been doing this, and I'm like, yo, 25, 30 years, like, wow, you know, but that wisdom accrued. What could you tell young Kris Wright about how to walk his path if he's on that campus in 2020?
Yeah, it's a great question. And funny thing, Sekou, I have to remind myself of what I'm about to say daily. But I say one of my favorite motivational quotes is information is power. I truly believe that in order to really understand how to navigate, you know, any of these organizations, you got to figure out how to get to the information. And that could be, you know, through people, that could be through mentors, that could be through digging in and just really learning. Like, you know, a lot of people probably don't understand or realize that there's a lot of information out there. So when you think about publicly traded companies, if you're not looking at proxies, if you're not looking at 10Ks, you're basically, you know, walking through these organizations dark, not knowing what they're about and what they're doing. It's critical for me to understand that. I'd also say that I always have to remind myself, understand the field of play. If you don't understand the field of play, it's hard for you to understand how to play the game. So it's really critical. And there's a number of variables that fall into that. It's how you move, you know, what your level of professionalism is, how you communicate. Like those are just some real practical things that folks who are interested in being in any industry should always be making sure that they're intentionally focused on doing.
Yeah. I've talked about your background, but now I want to make sure we don't forget about the fact that what you're doing now, and you mentioned the new position. What is the element of your job now that's been most surprising in your transition from when you started to now? You're managing people, you're managing, you know, all these things that, you know, as an executive, you got to have your hands a little bit everywhere to make sure you know, like you said, blocking downfield for your team. What is the element of your job now that you think, if you could distill it down to kind of a real essence, that's most important for you to get your job done every day? What is the one thing you got to have lined up for your team and for your job to be done right?
Great question. I hate to oversimplify, but in the spirit of time, I will. I have this thing that I call the 3 Ps. And it's the 3 Ps that, you know, allow me to operate on a daily basis. My 3 Ps are people. And, you know, that's so critical, whether this role, whether the previous role, whether a role 10 years ago. If the people you have around you, whether they're your subordinates, whether they're your peers, whether they're your teammates, if you're not aligned, if you guys are not in the foxhole together, it's just not going to work. So that's why it's really, really important for me as a leader to make sure that the team understands I got their back, because I want them to have my back as well. Product, you know, when I think about my journey in this industry, outside of working in brand marketing and outside of working in sports marketing, a majority of my journey has been with my hands tethered to product, and it's, you know, clearly one thing I'm the most passionate about. That's the thing that gets me up in the morning and gets me excited not to go to work, because I don't believe that what I do is a job. It's my passion. It's my calling. And then process. And there's 2 elements of process. There's process excellence through the filter of what we do every day and making sure that I clear the path for the team to do their best work. And then I always like to use the analogy of process just in terms of mentorship as well. I think a lot of times folks always look at the end result. So let's just use me as an example. They'll see, me as a leader, and they'll look at, I want to be there, but I always have to remind folks there's a journey to get there, and it ain't easy. And if you only look at the end result, you're missing the important part, and that's the struggle, that's the journey, that's everything through the filter process that it takes to get to where we are in these different seats.
No doubt. Finally, I want to ask you one last thing, just about if you got a chance, obviously, to explain to students, and especially students at HBCUs who are not in those arenas where you have the brand name humongous programs, be it a football, basketball, whatever. When I'm a Jackson State grad. When I was on campus, Lindsey Hunter was there.
Yep.
So my mind was spinning about how do you make a transition from what's seen as kind of an alternate route to a bigger stage. You've obviously done that. How do you infuse the right mindset for young people in terms of you got to look beyond the borders of wherever you are as a student, especially, or as a person starting out in an entry-level position, and making that work for you in all these different levels? I mean, the different brands you worked at. I can imagine it's hard to transition from brand to brand in any realm, but certainly in the sports marketing, sports product brand world, that's got to be a tough thing to do, to go from one place to another place with the allegiances that are shared, the relationships that are shared. How do you explain that to a student who maybe doesn't see beyond whatever they're doing right now at the place they're at right now, what the possibilities might be?
It's another really good question, Sekou. I think, I can only speak for me. For me, what helped drive me was ambition. I knew I wanted more. I knew I wanted, when I say this, I'm not saying this disparagingly at all. But I grew up in a different era in New York and in Harlem. But I knew for the conditions I grew up in, I wanted more. And going back to those kind of conditions, whether it's, South Central LA, Harlem, Fort Greene, Brooklyn, like that wasn't an option for me. And I needed that. That was simple motivation to fuel my ambition to get me to where I needed to get and where I knew I was going. So I'd say that was the first thing. The second thing I'd say is super important in getting to a place where you're looking at where you want to go is just really just being maniacally focused on where it is you want to go. And for me, again, the passion piece was huge because just there's no denying exactly what was driving me and what was fueling my fire, and that was truly a big help as well.
Excellent. Well, listen, man, I appreciate it. I know it's early out there on the West Coast. You got plenty of work to do, but I can't thank you enough for at least giving us some time and some insights. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Charles McClellan, SWAC commissioner, putting together this advisory board is some invaluable information that, man, when I was a student, if I'd had access to people in the business in all these different realms, how much of a benefit that could be to students, just knowing somebody in those positions. I didn't know that you could do what I did when I got to college. When I got into sports journalism business, I was the first person in my family that ever even thought about doing something that crazy. But the examples of seeing somebody with a shared experience or that looks like you, I can't tell you how powerful that is for young people. Having been there before, just like you, I can imagine what that means to the young people listening now. So we appreciate your time and appreciate you blazing that trail that you're blazing.
Yeah, can I just say one thing in closing? I think
sure.
I think it's super important, especially to the last question. For all the kids out there going to HBCUs, don't allow the fact that it's not a big state school a big private university. Don't allow that to be a crutch. At the end of the day, it's all about you, what you have in you, the passion you have in you, the ambition you have in you. Like that's what's going to get you to the next opportunity that you're looking for. So listen, you can go to Jackson State, Texas Southern, FAMU, Howard, like it doesn't matter. It's all about you and what you want to do. And you'll figure it out, especially if you're an innovative thinker. You'll figure it out. You'll figure out how to get there.
No doubt. Words of wisdom, Kris Wright. Appreciate you, sir.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you.
All right, brother.
All right.